Good morning. I'm Amy, one of the clergy at St. Francis Episcopal Parish and Community Center, and it is Wednesday morning, June 2nd, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about testimony. If you were at the worship service on Sunday, May 30th, either via live stream on our YouTube or Facebook channel or in person, indoors or outdoors, you heard me preach a very personal sermon, a testimony on John 3, verses 1 through 17. John 3 is the story of Nicodemus. Nicodemus, a rabbi and a Pharisee, recognizes in Jesus the presence of God, and he is drawn to Jesus. And it is John 3 is the interaction between Jesus and Nicodemus. When I shared a personal story, what I did was I shared my testimony. And to be honest with you, it is the first time that I shared that testimony publicly. Sort of surprising, isn't it, to be a priest? I've been a priest for 5 years. I've worked in the church even before I was a priest as a lay staff member, and then before I was lay staff, I was in leadership. I was a vestry member, and I spent my whole life in the Episcopal Church, and yet I shared my public testimony for the first time with you all. What is testimony? That's a word we don't use so much in the Episcopal Church, or maybe if some of you know that word, it doesn't have very happy connotations. Testimony, as I think of it, or as you may think of it, is John the Baptist. John the Baptist, as you know from the Gospel of John or from the Synoptic Gospels, is a wild man, seemingly described as a wild man, coming to testify to the light, as it says in the Gospel of John. John is not the light himself, but he is testifying to the light. So John is sharing publicly his experience of God, his knowledge of God, and he is calling everyone who will listen into relationship with God. I was wondering about you. Have you ever thought about what your testimony is? How would you describe your relationship with God and how God is working in your life? Were there particular moments when you knew God to be working in your life? Were there particular moments when you felt something stirring in you and you felt resistance to identifying that as God? I know that that was true for me. Even though I first felt a call to the priesthood at 19, I didn't have what I would call a road to Damascus moment until I was 23 and I met my birth parents for the first time. That's the testimony I shared on Sunday. If you haven't thought about how you would testify to how God is at work in your life, I invite you to reflect and pray on that. You needn't share it publicly, but just ask God to illuminate that for you so that you can tell yourself that story. My own road to Damascus moment happened when I was 23, and I shared it publicly just 2 days ago. So there's no right or wrong answer, and there's no right or wrong time to share your testimony. But we are all, by virtue of being ministers of the gospel, called to proclaim the gospel. We can proclaim it in our deeds, absolutely, and must proclaim it in our actions, absolutely. And how powerful it is to also be able to proclaim it, even just to yourself in words, so that you yourself know the story of God at work in your life and that when necessary, God will ask you and you'll be able to share that story with others. And thus, the Christian community will continue as it has for generations, for millennia, from one Christian to another Christian, telling the story of God at work in our lives. Amen.